What's up? In this segment, it's gonna be more about Guardians of the Galaxy, but I'm gonna cross it into the movie Lucy, and I just found it's a fitting contrast of Guardians of the Galaxy versus Lucy, and it's kind of a fitting comparison because it's kind of like, in my opinion, the sci-fi audience versus the present spiritual community. The present spiritual community, like I did a video on Lucy, and it was my highest ranking video in terms of like in this channel, and I found it interesting because the movie it gave a lot of people a lot of interest about the possibilities of the potential of the brain, and potential superhuman gifts that a person could achieve if they you know acquire those gifts or understand those tools or understand the tools that's needed to unlock those powers or those abilities. And in a sense, the New Age community and the more modern spiritual community has been talking about that for years, since the 60s. And the reason why I say the more modern spiritual community, because in the East, where they understood that those powers are achievable, they just knew that they never really made a big deal about it because it was just something that was more like, hey, you do this, this is what happens. It wasn't anything glorious, and that makes any sense. Like the in the East, the real goal was to achieve enlightenment, knowledge, to be able to become a better person, to be able to understand your environment better, and those supernatural powers are just a manifestation of that. It's like if I know how to use my sight better, and sight is the physical version of what's called clairvoyance, then I could, as my sight gets better, I could get clairvoyant. If somebody has like hearing, and astral hearing, which you could hear spirits, is a direct correlation of that. All of a sudden, you get astral hearing. It, it was something that's tools that you get on the path of that journey. Like you're on the journey and you get those tools, but it's not some. It's not the tools are not the journey. They're things that come from the journey, but the real journey is the enlightenment. It's to receive. Is the Gnostic say gnosis. So in the East, it wasn't really a big thing. But in the newer communities, in newer spiritual communities, particularly in the West, it's become a subject of obsession. So much so that even the movie Lucy, which is a good movie in terms of discussing those possibilities. Would I say it was a good movie in terms of as a fan, just an entertaining movie? Average. But in terms of discussing those possibilities, yeah, it was a pretty good movie. But the problem is, people have been talking about the power of the brain for a long time, and the world's not changing. The world's getting darker, right? And you get people who talk about, oh well, you unlock the powers, could get some chakras, get some, not get some chakras. I'm sorry, do things to open your chakras, get some gems, eat right, yada yada yada. So it became something where the brain has infinite possibilities, but very few people, at least publicly, are getting close to unlocking it. And I think that's what Lucy kind of represented, a great movie for possibilities. But it also represented to me the flaws in the occult community. Not really the real occult community, but the occult community of people who, the modern occult community. In fact, so much so that even in the concept of Lucy, you start having people who are attacking the movie because, and I've actually saw this from both races, white and black. I even saw a white writer in Huffington Post say, well, they're tired of, all these movies having white characters. And obviously, the esoteric version of, well, the conscious community, or the esoteric version, wing of the conscious community, attacked it for not having Saint Lucy, but not having somebody of African descent as the figure of Lucy. So it kind of became this kind of, not political, but semi-controversial type of movie. And that's, to me, perfect example of the current spiritual community, which you could break down, the current modern spiritual community, which you could break down into New Age community, conscious community, and the more recent clandestine organization community, which they call themselves the occult community. So you could say they're the occult community, but they're the occult community, from my perspective, that's kind of lost their way. So, the newer versions of the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, people who still call themselves the the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Not that there's not real versions of them, but I'm talking about the everyday versions of them. And this is not the video to discuss that, but those three communities specifically. Now, what's happened is that Guardians of the Galaxy came in, and it just kind of came by everybody's radar. Obviously, not the mainstream because it did very well, but and I'm gonna talk about that in another video. But it went by everybody's radar because, to me, while Lucy discussed possibilities that people talk about all the time, they get some right, they get some wrong. We use 10% of our brain, but some people say no, we use more percent of our brain. But then is it the conscious version of our brain? Like when you say we use more than 10%, are you talking about the subconscious mind who's controlling the body, speech patterns, breathing? Technically, we don't have random access to that. That's going on a part of our brain that we can't really access with our conscious mind. It goes into all these different things. But for the most part, for me, what Lucy kind of represented, in my opinion, was just the fact that on the overall level, it was a movie that was discussing possibilities, but it kind of so fit the current spiritual community where they just daydream. It's just daydreaming. They talk about it all day, but nothing will happen. And part of that is because they don't really understand real occultism. And when I look at the Guardians of the Galaxy, it went by everybody in the occult community radar. Like, those three communities I'm talking about. And the more clandestine organization, occult, Rosicrucian, Freemasons, I'm not really talking about them too much. It's really the New Age community, conscious community, more than anything else. It went by everybody's radar. And I found it interesting because in some ways, it dropped just as much codes, maybe more, than Lucy did. So people would say, really? I didn't see it. It was kind of like a, childish movie. On the surface, of course. But when you look at it from another angle, first of all, you have 5 members, right? 5 members. 5 members for the 5 elements. The interesting thing is, one of the members was a plant. And this is the thing that's going to be interesting. A tree, like he was like a living tree. Like a tree that's like humanoid. Basically means stand on 2 feet. Interesting concept about that is that when you get into grown-up occultism, not little kid occultism, but grown-up occultism, understanding the mind of plants becomes essential. It becomes one of those things where you understand the plants is the center of almost everything you do. Like if you look at the tarot card and the Fool, when you see the green on the Fool card, it's talking about the plant. And in the tarot tradition, the Fool is sort of symbolic of this. It's like God in a sense. This is the starting point. It's the beginning. And what's that really saying is that understanding plants and particularly minerals is the beginning of all occult work. And there's no accident that out of the 5 members, the tree was the most powerful. That wasn't by luck. Even if the artist, whoever created Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't know who created Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the comic. I don't remember who created the comic. It wasn't Stan Lee. But even if they just got that from their subconscious mind, that means something because the plant spirits is the beginning of all major occult work. Now you compare that with Lucy, and what did they do, Lucy? They took a drug, synthetic drug, and activated their powers. See, people have to kind of be able to get their head out the clouds and see the difference. I'm not one of those conspiracy people who talk about Lucy's mind control. I'm just getting into the fact that the movies that we're supposed to be looking at, we don't look at. And I'm talking about the spiritual community. I'm not talking about, because this channel has a lot of sci-fi fans. I'm not talking about it from a sci-fi angle. I'm talking about it from a spiritual decoding angle. The movies that we're supposed to be looking at, we don't look at. So out of this camp, you had 5 people, and one of them was a tree. We talked about the plants, and he was the most powerful. Then the main character, Star-Lord, was interesting because it ended up seeing that his father wasn't human. He looked human. So when he had to get the power gem, and the power gem kills every single person who touches it, what happens? Well, when he got the power gem, it didn't kill him. And then he found later on that he's only half human. That's symbolic of the concept of Messiah seeds I spoke about in other channels, where they look human. They are human for the most part because their mind accepts that program. But there's something a little bit different. Now, I'm not going to be like the other people who tell you how great you are, how special you are. You're going to have to work like everyone else. It's just that maybe for a regular person, they may take 80 years of constant spiritual work to get their goal, right? Messiah probably get it 20, 30 years, maybe 30 years. Doesn't mean that in 30 years they can be a god, but it just means their normal goal of enlightenment or gnosis. Now there's or what the Indians call samadhi. Now there's way higher goals than that, but you can't actually even access that until you get to what the humans call enlightenment. So when you see Star-Lord, he looked human. He definitely acted human, for God's sake, but he was something a little. He had something a little bit different to him, but he didn't know it himself. That's symbolic of a real metaphysical concept that the person who got the movie, I mean, from the comic book, but the movie too. The movie really hit it. The person, James Gunn, I think, who got the movie, directed the movie, really got that concept right. And in a sense, that concept obviously will be above anything that is in Lucy, because in essence, realistically, all people are on the same path, right? We just have different exits. We have different, like, we detour, but we have the same end goal. And what happens is usually the older souls are going to be the ones who are going to like spiritual information. So while the New Age and conscious community might look down on people who are not getting a certain type of information, it's not for them yet. They have to evolve, in a sense. And in a sense, when you see someone like Star-Lord, or what I represented, even when you say stars and lords, could be perceived as beings from the stars, not going into the alien stuff, but just more beings who had knowledge of the stars of astrology, and they were able to practice the real hermetic or occult arts, right? And somebody who's a descendant of them. That's a very important concept that most people probably don't understand the way they're supposed to. So I think the movie really hit that pretty well. Even with the raccoon, if you study shamanism or animism, raccoons tend to be very curious. They could be problem solvers. You look at Rocket Raccoon. I mean, he was a smart dude. He was a little crazy, but he was smart. He was be able to fly. He was able to get out of jail. He was a problem solver, and they had that as a raccoon. And normally you say, "Oh my God, like this is not really a great concept. A raccoon with a gun. It's kind of cheesy," but it worked, and there was actually metaphysical principles to that. Even in a sense, the power gem. This is gonna get into more eventually, probably Avengers 3, which is not even come out close to now. We're not even in Avengers 2 yet, but the power gem or the Infinity Stones in general just sort of symbolically represent the concept of loading and charging. When you load an object with power, and when a special being, or when a being, what I should say, a being who's more advanced, loads an object with power, they're able to actually help the object to recharge itself by itself. So the object becomes almost sentient. It's almost like if I make a rock, and the rock can recharge itself, and the rock has power. And anyone who gets the rock has power, right? That's actually a hermetic concept that's fairly known, but I don't really think it's understood as much by the metaphysical community in the present. So the Infinity Gems sort of represent that. So in a sense, even when they're talking about even the celestial, and they're talking about stuff like the celestials and stuff like that, a severed celestial head. That was in the movie, with the celestials are a race of beings in the Marvel universe, and cosmic beings. In a sense, when they talk about Infinity Stones, Infinity Gems, they probably wouldn't discuss it in the movies, but somebody has to make them. So then that means that you get into people who are more powerful. So that's why in the comics, Living Tribunal was able to shut down the Infinity Gems, to be honest, because there's people more powerful. Somebody made those gems. So even the search for the stones symbolically is getting into the concept of loading and charging. So when you see all these people on the internet, we're talking about loading stone, charging their gems and their crystals. That is a real concept, even though they may not totally understand it correctly. But it's a real concept. And when a different type of being loads certain objects, then other lower beings always hunt for them. So in the Guardians of the Galaxy, when Thanos to Ronan was after a gem, and then eventually I guess Thanos would get all 5 in the Avengers movie eventually, that's a real concept. So obviously that's a concept that's real, and obviously nothing in Lucy will be talking about it. Lucy is fighting Chinese triads, for God's sake. So in a sense, when you look at it from a certain angle, no question, Guardians of the Galaxy was a serious movie, even from metaphysical standpoints. Most importantly, and they got this correctly, it's still Venus. A true occult movie, a true movie that taps into the occult, taps into the imagination, must still be entertaining. Star Wars was one of the most important. Star Wars and Matrix are probably the 2 most important movies when it comes to decoding metaphysics in movies. They were both entertaining. At the end of the day, it still has to be entertaining, because entertainment is tapping to Venus, tapping to imagination. The imagination still needs to be stimulated, still needs to enjoy itself. When it doesn't enjoy itself, it comes out flat, and then the original message doesn't really get delivered. So Lucy was not really entertaining. That's the problem. I don't really put it down for it not being entertainment because I think the only way it could have ended better is if you had another version of Lucy and they fought. So if you fighting regular gangsters, of course it's gonna end like that. But when I'm looking at it, and they kind of came out almost together. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy came out I think a month later, August. Even the August date is very symbolic of stuff in the sense that, I mean, when it came out in August, it's under the sign Leo. What most people don't really realize is once Guardians of the Galaxy came out and it was successful, people knew that Marvel was going to be a dominant. Those who know understand that Marvel was going to be a dominant power for at least another 5 to 10 years minimum. Minimum 5, probably 10. Because realistically, Guardians of the Galaxy is really the heart of the Marvel Universe. It seems like Avengers. It does. Avengers is probably a better franchise, obviously. You can make, movies out of each character. But when Guardians of the Galaxy had the success it did, is when people knew, wow, anything they put out, if they fit it within that framework, it's going to work. And that became a new concept for a lot of artists rising up. Some people are not going to get it. But when you make work and you can make interconnected work and it could look like different franchises, you put it together as one story, it makes a massive decoding job 10 years from now when you put all the stories together, because there is some truth. There is some stuff being put together. Like when you would have to look at all the Iron Man movies, Captain America movies, Avengers movie, and put it together. There is a message being said. But that becomes something that's a headache for a decoder. And when it got successful, no question, it became the heart of it because it guaranteed, it cemented their power, in a sense. And Leo, it coming out in August, is no accident. Leo, or the sign of Leo, in terms of astrology, governs the upper spine and the heart. So there's no coincidence of why it came out in August and the success it had. So when I think Guardians of the Galaxy, I think sci-fi. This channel's audience, all the nerds, all the sci-fi kids, comic book heads. When I think Lucy, New Age community, conscious community, who doesn't like it, of course. But it's not going to have the goal. It's not going to achieve the goal it wants because they forgot. Yes, you must put principles in it, but it has to be entertaining as well. Hope that helps. Till next time. Peace.